alignment that I have to the F1 world is, if you want your car to be as fast as possible and to perform on track as fast as possible, you can put more and more sensors on that car. There's always more data you can get off that car, but it comes at the cost of weight.
Welcome to episode 47 of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today I am joined by Paul Teasdale, and what a gem Paul is. From sausage making to Formula One to implementing Formula One strategies in workplaces. One great example from today's conversation was implementing Formula One processes to help cut the time it took to replenish stock on shelves in the supermarket, which normally would have cost them millions per year. So I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Paul as much as I did. And yeah, let me know what you think. Eugene.leeway on Instagram, giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. You can also leave a voice note here on Spotify and I'll get back as soon as possible. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Paul Teasdale. Paul, it's great to have you here on Give Yourself Some Leeway. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eugene. Absolute pleasure, mate.
So I think one of the things where I always like to start out with, especially with coaches, is that somewhere on our journey we hit a rock bottom or this turning point or this moment of realization that something needs to change.
Yeah.
And that brings us on a journey of recovery, growth, and development.
Hmm.
And then for the likes of coaches, there's this spark or vision or this calling to serve others. And whether that's as a result of serving others helps you on your growth journey, or maybe you just don't want other people to go through the pain or the experience that you went through. What was that like for you, and why is it that you do what you do?
Always a good question, and just something that challenges you to think back and go, what is it that triggered all this off? And I know in our earlier conversations prior to this recording, I was like, I don't think I've ever been burnt out. I don't think I've ever been burnt out. I fizzled out, and that sort of really struck home with me. Is actually the moments that have led to a big change in my career, and most notably when I left the McLaren team and to go out and work independently. That was because I felt fizzled, and it wasn't because there was more and more on me and I was getting this feeling of burnout and I'm getting under too much pressure. It was almost the opposite. I had too little to do. I wasn't being challenged, and I don't work well in that environment, and I tend to just let it wash over me, and before I know it, I've spent far too long not doing the right things, and that then translates into all sorts of things with my own health, my own life outside of work. You stop going to the gym as much, you eat poorly, you do all this sort of things, and it's actually this mental state of burnout is the other end of the spectrum, and I've almost experienced this fizzle out piece of I'm not being stimulated enough and not being challenged enough in those environments at times, and then that's led to actually this needs to change, and the only thing I can do is to take it upon myself to make a change, take a leap, and do something different. And I've always had some element of coaching in what I've done, coaching conversations. I've helped people along, and it's a big part of what I like to do. And I like to use my experiences and the things that I've learned along the way, so that people can stand on the shoulders, and move even faster than I've progressed and do even better than me. And that's always been the bits that have really helped me, is when you see people going, oh, if I use that insight, if I use that story, I can use that to help me to springboard to the next level and to move forward. So that's what I like to do, and that is either through a coaching piece or facilitation, workshops, anything that helps people to have that realization and then a change in mindset in terms of what they can do differently.
I like the way you say like that you fizzled out rather than burnt out, but there are a lot of similarities. Even though you weren't overwhelmed or overworked or stressed, there was still a disconnect. There was still a disengagement because you weren't fully stimulated in what you were doing.
Yeah.
And it was that lack of action that it again, it was you out of alignment with what you wanted to do.
Very
So
much.
there were similarities there,
Mm.
but yes, it wasn't to the same extent of what people experience when they have full blown burnout. But yes, you did have the symptoms. I do like the way you say that you fizzled out, and how it differentiates. And was this before you got into Formula One, or was it during Formula One?
It was towards the end of my time in that stage, just the way in which the role that I was in at the time, and the structure of the organisation, lots of change was happening, and it left me in a bit of a void. And that void was sort of missed in the organisation, and there was, because of other things that were happening, I didn't have the same workload, I didn't have the same things to do. And it was a lot of waiting for the next thing to come along and move forward. In the consulting world, you'd probably call it being on the bench, or, sort of waiting for that next thing to come along. And there was no visibility of it. And it's just trying to keep that mindset of, actually, I need to do something. I want to do something. I can add value, and please let me. And if after a while, certainly with me, that sort of tends to, well, I'm not going to push it, because I've had the hard times, I've had the high pressure, high stakes, big, big long hours and workload that goes along with it. Now's a low period. Let's enjoy that for a little bit while it lasts. And then I rode the wave too too long, shall we say? And it just ends up going, well, where am I now, and what am I doing? And I think it's still a lot of those same feelings that you get with burnout, which is, I can't continue to do this if I want to move forward in what I'm doing. And so, as soon as you realize that, and realize that you need to take action to move it forward, then that's the real sort of driver to change in that sense.
Because the only reason when you said you felt understimulated straight away was like, but this is Formula One. This is like literally top performance, high performance, high stress atmosphere, and um was there a point, was it probably, let's say, during the pandemic and the likes, did Formula One take a step back, and was it quieter during those years, and was it then that you took a step back, or was it before then when we did that you got into consulting?
So it was going into the pandemic piece, and if you're asking when I went independent into that consulting piece, that was, yeah, after the pandemic. But um, to position this as well, when I say I worked with McLaren and worked in that Formula One team, it wasn't directly with that race team. I wasn't. It's not as if I was a mechanic in the pits or in the design team. I worked for a part of the organisation that took the methodologies, the ways of working, and some of the technologies out to other organisations. So it was essentially a consulting role by any other name, but then going out and with those bigger projects, with those big clients. Here's a big opportunity. Let's deliver this. And just because of the way the organization was working at the time, that those big opportunities weren't there to work on. There's still things to do, and there's still a but the bits that I like to get my teeth into, the bits that really stimulate me, those client facing bits, just weren't there at that point. And that's what, after a while, led to that fizzle out.
So that was, let's say, the environment that you were in. You're bringing elements of what, let's say, the consulting and the coaching that was done in Formula One. Was it for the teams that you're bringing elements of that to different? What was it like benchmarking other companies to the high performance of Formula One?
So maybe an example might start to
Yeah,
cement this a
yeah.
little bit. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them, in fact, one of the first roles that I did and first clients in that space was supermarket shelf stacking, of all things. So it's like, what's that got to do with Formula One? Well, actually, a major supermarket, which is who we were dealing with at the time, um, if you think about the scale of what they do, and the amount of labor alone that they use to put product onto the shelves. This particular client was spending £1 billion a year just on putting product onto shelves, if you just take the labor cost. So it's a big old problem. And they knew somewhere along the lines that it wasn't being as effective as it could be. So people were either taking product to the shelf and there wasn't a gap there when they thought it would be, or they go to a shelf, they've got no product, but actually there's a massive gap and they need to fill it. So they're going to go back to the stores, and it's back and forth and all this rework that goes along. And they've no real way of understanding the reality and what's the scale of the actual problem and what goes on. So we worked with this client and worked with a partner as well at the time, and just said, right, we can build you proof of concepts. We can do modeling and simulation around this, so that you can start to understand not the definitive like individual numbers here, but the general approach to what you're doing. And by modeling and putting new technologies in place, you can start to say, let's play with this in the virtual world and see what would happen if you had infinite shelf space, for instance. So if you put all the product that you brought out from the back store, it all fit on the shelf because your shelves are big enough to hold all this product. What would that mean in terms of how quickly you could get the product out? Compare that to how you do it at the moment, you've got yourself a gap. So you can start to quantify, look at these things in different ways and using different methodologies to say, actually, you've got about 200 million plus opportunity here. So is it worth spending? Is it worth then going to the next stage and getting better at this and moving this proof of concept along? 200 million sounds pretty decent to me. What about you? Let's move it forward. And so that's one example of taking a technology and an approach and some expertise that you could then apply to a situation that very few people would go, do you know what we need in this supermarket shelf stacking problem? We need a Formula One team involved. And then similar situation with air traffic control or air traffic management in an airport. So I was over in the States working with a big airport here about how do you have better data-driven decisions around which aircraft you move around, which do you prioritize, what's the impact if you decide I'm going to move that one out first, what's the impact of that on the next and the next and the next, and that sort of simulation world and the data analytics that go along with it can help you understand the impact or the predicted impact of what's going on. And I was that front-facing client lead to understand what their challenges were, what their opportunities, and then we would bring in these amazing data scientists, simulation modeling, analytics people that were could help us along with some of the proof of concepts, and it was amazing the stuff that we could do in that space.
That's amazing. They're concepts that I wouldn't even have considered. Like the first thing that came to mind when you said that you're taking Formula One to outside businesses was either that you were doing, let's say, like a pit stop simulation in the supermarkets to try and fill the shelves that quickly, or that you were bringing, let's say, like mindset focused coaching that you're probably giving to drivers and to teams so that they can work in that high performance environment, that high stress environment, and taking that same mindset and bringing it to businesses so that they can operate in a similar capacity.
And that is other things that we've done in that space as well. Particularly around the changeover pieces. If you work, my background is in operational performance improvement in all sorts of bits, food manufacturing in particular, but all sorts of different environments. And for years before my time, the whole ethos has been changeovers, pit stops are your epitome of the good changeover. All you had at McLaren and other Formula One teams do this as well, is you've actually got the actual environment, the actual team, and you've got a car that you can get people to change the tyres on and run a workshop around that and get them to debrief and see what's what. And yeah, and then they've also got in front of them the art of the possible as well. So when you go in and you put your hands on a tire and you try and change it and you're doing it in a team and you think you're doing amazingly at sort of 12, 15 seconds, which is what most people, sort of newbies, would come in and do, then to go right, you can get this under 2 seconds is you can go, that's what's possible if you do all this stuff. Now you've then got to take that back to what's the challenge and the opportunity at the organization or with the individual at the time. Is that the mindset that they need? Is that the problem they need solving? So it's very easy to solve problems, but are you solving the right problems? Yeah.
That's brilliant. Again, that's asking the right questions as well. It's coming in and people looking for the answers, but I think the important thing is, are they asking the right questions? And also coming to them and asking them the right questions to try and solve the solution that they think they're looking for.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a very interesting concept. because when it came to the whole, let's say that the pit stop, simulating a pit stop for processes coming into especially food and beverage manufacturing, I kept on thinking of the Henry Ford assembly line concept. And it was
Mm.
like, is it something similar to that, that everyone has a specific duty rather than getting everyone to multitask and they're getting duties mixed up and there's lots of, let's say, crossover between different tasks and things getting missed and mistakes happening? Is it about trying to have a more optimized assembly or systemized approach or process, trying to weed out all the lost time?
Mm.
I think that's the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking of how fast a pit stop can be.
Yeah, yeah. It's about, first of all, observation. What's the actual problem you're trying to solve? Why is this worth your time? So if this problem isn't worth solving right now for you, then the was it the from Toyota, the biggest inefficiency is making an unnecessary process efficient. It's the biggest waste of time. You don't need it, so stop putting the effort in to make it efficient. So it's about understanding what is it you're trying to do. Is this the right place to spend your efforts? And once you've got there, observing what's happening. If you can split it out, if you can, the more simple you can make anything, more known and well communicated and clear and concise for people, the better. So if there are areas where people can have specific jobs and specific roles, brilliant. That really helps people to be concise, but it might not help with the overall performance. You might have a limited team and you need them to be multitasking. Um, so really does depend on the situation, but it's about looking at that overall end to end piece and saying, actually, how do we maximize our efforts? Sorry, maximize our output by minimizing our efforts and inputs in all of this. Give people the right roles, make sure they understand exactly what's required of them, make sure things work, make sure people are working together. Not so that, one of the most common things is you see people doing the pit stop exercise on an actual car, and people are thrilled to bits because they've changed a tire in 6 seconds. Their team's won, brilliant. I'm just like, well, your car hasn't finished yet because somebody's struggling at the back, and they're taking over 20 seconds. So how long's the car in the pits for if that's the case? It's not the 6 seconds that you've done; it's the 20 odd seconds of the slowest wheel. So whilst you were celebrating and saying, "Didn't I do a great job?" Could you not have helped that person? Could you not have done something else? Even just observed what they're doing so that you can learn for next time. So it's those lessons that come in and say, right, what do you do so that you focus relentlessly on the performance that you've got in front of you, and be honest about it and work with each other and work towards that common goal.
That's brilliant. Um, so I think another thing that comes to mind when I think of Formula One is again being that high stress environment. Um, does it happen often that, let's say, especially race teams and drivers experiencing burnout, especially when it comes to like either is it in between seasons when they're, let's say, training, or is it in the heat of a season that they tend to burn out if they feel they're overworked or overperforming?
I mean, it's a really tough one to say that because you firstly you never know. It's very rarely labelled that people have been burnt out. Lots of people work through it. It's still a very um, let's call it macho environment. It is purely male environment in this pits still. I don't think there are any teams that have female mechanics in their pit crews at the moment. There's no reason they couldn't, but it's still that male dominated environment. And a lot of that comes, and the fact that particularly in those race weekends, it's if there's a problem, you stay up until that problem's solved. It's
Yeah.
a and that is something. Sleep is a key one for anyone for burnout. In any situation, are you getting the right rest? Are you stepping away from it and making sure that you're not just banging your head against the brick wall? So it's a tough one to say. I'd say there's two scenarios that I see. One is just being overworked with the constant nature of there's no end to this. Even there's very little rest in that world. Even when you get to the end of the race weekend, You've got to travel. It's quite often big international moves to the next race, and then by the next day you're on to the right. How do we get better? What's next? How do we move forward? And there's no oh, let's sit on our laurels a little bit here, and aren't we doing well? Let's sort of step back and pat ourselves on the back. No, there's none of that. Even the people who are leading at the pack and have led for a long time, they're pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's an individual piece there as to how much people can take and what else is happening in their lives and things like that. And then for some people, there will be the element of, I'll just make it to the end of the season. I'll just push on. I'll just get there. And that moment of sort of vast differential, it's almost like a heat quench. You've been in so much heat for so long, and you then go into the sort of cold dip pool. That differential can shock people and say, well, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing now? Why is this for me? What's going on? How can I take this forward? I can't do that again for another season. And that is one of the key things that I do recognize, and in that kind of a world is a lot different to a lot of organizations, is that you've got a season and you've got a definitive end, you've got a race. It's not to say that you can't think of some of your operations like a race, but most operations, most companies that are working, there is just that move forward, and you've got to carry on the following day and the following day and the following day. Whereas when you do have a season to look to the end of, firstly, you know where you finished, and you've got a definitive end and a move on point from there. And that can have its advantages and have its disadvantages as well. So.
Yeah, definitely one thing that again, as you said, having the seasons as opposed to other workplaces, the seasons are like sprints. You're like, okay, I have this is when I'm starting, this is when I'm finishing, and it's like, okay, I can worry about all my stresses and I'm burning out and recovery time once the sprint is finished. But when, let's say, you have a deadline, you're working towards a deadline in the business, that and that could be your sprint, you're actually running a marathon. You know that that's your deadline, but that's just the end of project A.
Yeah.
As soon as you pass that deadline, it's okay. Project B is going to start literally a day later or an hour later than after project A finishes. It's like, okay, what's next? And you can't keep on rushing between, let's say, project A, B, C, D, sprint after sprint after sprint after sprint. It is a marathon, and it's trying to manage that. I think that's I think where I felt the crossover between Formula One and other organizations and businesses. I was like, yes, you've got this high performing, intense environment in Formula One, and crossing that over and bringing that to businesses. I could see it from the point of, yes, you're helping them manage with high performance, but then the difference was marathon versus a sprint. So I think that was definitely one concept that I found interesting. How do you apply what's let's say coaching in Formula One to businesses? And just another point again that you mentioned about Formula One, especially being a macho, hyper masculine environment. Is it likely that a lot of people are burning out in Formula One, and they never talk about it, they're never going to mention it because they don't want to be seen as weak or vulnerable or incompetent in their team, or letting their team down if they were to ever talk about their mental health? Do you feel that Formula One is let's say more very conservative in terms of talking about their mental health? Or have
Historically,
they? Yeah,
yes.
have they made a lot of
Definitely.
progress in recent years?
Definitely made a lot of progress, even in the time that I worked in there. Those years. If you only have to look back to the sort of 80s and 90s, and it was very much a case of push, 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 and you don't say anything, you move forward. I think the likes of Lewis Hamilton, he's very open about his mental health, and he is the epitome in a lot of ways of someone who is very, very focused on his performance. He's very laser focused on anything that happens has to happen for his performance and outcomes that goes on with it. And he recognizes that his mental health is a big factor in that. So he calls that stuff out, and he will talk about it. And a lot of other drivers, and this is where the drivers and the team leads and things, that's where it makes a difference, because by showing that and leading by example, that it's okay to talk about things, it's okay to recognize it, and it's, the leader's job is to create that environment to allow people to be safe enough to perform at their best. And I think that has changed a lot in the years from being a manager of a team to a leader of a team, and that recognizing that if people aren't able to turn up at their best and be themselves at their best, then you won't get their best. And so if you're focused on performance, you've got to be recognizing that all elements lead to that. And if the mental health piece is one of the most difficult and yet one of the easiest things to focus on, because it is so much of an impact. You can put in all of the efforts elsewhere, all the technology, all the processes. If people aren't feeling it, if they're burnt out, if they're fizzled out, or whatever it might be, they'll find a way to bring the negative in, and that will show in your performance in a much bigger leverage than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's what I always kind of kept coming back to, was that you can try to optimize everything. You can optimize all your technology, all your equipment, but if the focus and the attention isn't there, what does it matter?
Mm,
And I think that goes to, again, Formula One or any business. You can have you could have AI working for you half the time, but if you're not focused and giving the right prompts to that AI, even,
mm,
it's not going to work to its full potential.
no.
Um, I think that's where a lot of people are replace uh trying to replace humanity to a certain point, and not pay attention to our mental capacity, or mental limitations,
Mm,
that they don't want to give themselves time to recover mentally.
yeah.
They're like, oh, that's just another obstacle, I'm going to put that to the wayside and focus on getting my results first, I can worry about that later.
Mm,
But it's affecting them so much now, and they're not focused on taking care of themselves now. Or,
mm,
I'm too busy to take care of myself right now. I'm too
yeah.
busy. I've got too many deadlines. I've got too many expectations of me. I can't take care of myself right now. I'll do it in 6 months' time.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I'm definitely coming across that a lot, and it's kind of like, when they find themselves in that burnt out state, then 5 6 months down the line, hindsight is 2020. They're like, what was I doing? What was I even thinking?
yeah.
I could have done so much back then, and now here I am in this state, and it's completely burnt out, completely fizzled out, even as you said.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of, how do you bring around that awareness, especially to teams, or to when you come to into businesses, coming to leadership and coming to management,
Mm,
and how do you get them? Sometimes they are completely oblivious. They're not ignorant of the need for mental health. That, yes, of course, they know that mental health is important, but they just don't see it in their teams, or they don't
mm,
recognize the red flags or the early warning signs. So how do you approach leadership when you come into a business, and being like, these are the signs to look out for, or um you need to become more aware of this happening in your workplace?
mm,
Do you feel that's, let's say, business specific sometimes, or do you think there are general signs
mm.
to look out for?
I think every business thinks that they're individual, and they're not. We're all facing the same problems, the same challenges. The solutions are generally the same in one way or another. And one of the key solutions is to talk it through and to understand it, and make sure that you bring these things to the front. And so, one of the things I would always look out for is, are people opening up about things? When you're asking questions about what's gone on, how do people respond to something that's happened? You might have had, if you're in a manufacturing operation, there's been a big bit of downtime on your line or something, or if you're in a bank and there's been a big mess up with a loan that's happened. How do they respond to that when you ask them what's happened? Is it a case of, well, this is what happened, and this is what we're going to learn from it, and this is how we're all getting together as a team to address that and move forward. That's a very positive, we've got something to work with here, people, and things that are moving forward. Whereas if everybody's looking around, they're not saying anything, they're shifting their eyes to, who do I blame? How do I hide from this? Or they're denying. One of the things I'll often talk about is trust, and particularly trust in data. That's one area you can build trust within a team. But actually, if you haven't got trusted data, people hide behind that, and that, I think, is a usual sign of when you put facts and figures in front of people and they've got space to argue again. Oh, I'm not sure it was that, and maybe can we go back and check those figures? And I don't think it was half an hour downtime. I think it was more like 25 minutes, and maybe that wasn't to do this, it was to do that. Well, that's just using energy in a way that is avoiding the problem in front of you. So how can you? One of the things I'll talk to organizations about is, how do you measure trust in your data? Do you measure accuracy? Yeah, we've got really accurate data, or we've got a problem with accuracy. We recognize that. Okay, what's your trust level like? What? Sorry. Well, do people trust your data? Oh, of course they do. Okay, so if I go into this meeting, nobody's going to challenge the numbers that are in front of them in this report. Oh, they might do, and yeah, sometimes they do. Oh, yeah, they do most. Yeah, they always do. Nobody believes it. So if you haven't got that trusted data, that is a good sign for me that people have got a space to hide. And there's a story going back to the F1 days that, from, I think it was David Coulthard who said this, one of the drivers anyway. They talked about a culture of responsibility at McLaren. And people went, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, the data is so clear and it's so obvious that when I go into a corner or I come out of a corner, and if I've braked even half a meter too late, or a millisecond too late, and I've gone the wrong angle, and I've done things wrong, by the time I come out of that corner, everybody has the data in front of them that says exactly what angles I used and when I put the brakes on, how much pressure I put, and they trust that data to the extent that I can't say, oh, it wasn't my fault, there was something wrong with the car. They go, nope, that's what it is. And so what that leads to, if you do it right, is you come out of that corner and you would say, the only thing I could do was to put my hands up and say, that was my fault. I made a mistake. How can we learn? What can we do better? And that is one of those practical things that you can do to help as a team, help as an organization, is actually, how do you provide them with trusted data that helps them make better decisions and helps people to not hide behind the facts and figures or the grey areas in those facts and figures, and just go, right, that's the situation. We all believe it. We all know it. What do we do now? And so I would always look out for those elements of, what are people saying? Do they trust the data? How are they interacting as a team when something's gone wrong? Are they putting their hands up to be responsible for performance challenges that have happened? And when things are going wrong, are they working together? Are they collaborating to move things forward? Because if you've set up your team correctly and you're nurturing that team as a leader, and that element of abundance starts to come through, and you are feeding that fire of abundance, then people want to help. And it's one of the things within that world of Formula One that I think is a key element that doesn't have as much burnout as you think it would do, because they've got purpose and they've got that abundance. I know you've talked to the great Jimmy Burrows, a good friend of mine, and he talks about this PACE model for and yeah, that sort of purpose and abundance and connection and exploration and downtime. I think the pieces in his model there, and yeah, those elements are really clear. If you focus on how do you make those elements work in your organization as a leader, then people start to be more abundant, and that feeds upon each other, and they start to go, right, we all know what we're trying to achieve. And if I sit back once I've done my bit and put my feet up and don't help you, then we're not going to achieve what we all want to achieve. And it's a very clear thing in F1, is that we want that car to be at the front of the pack, and then once it is at the front of the pack, we want to be top of the podium. Once it is at top of the podium, we want to be beating the rest and stay in the top of the podium all the time. How do you try, and you can do that for your teams. You can do that for your organization. What is your purpose? How does your team fit in? What's your team purpose, your individual purpose? So that people can connect to that and to start to work together and collaborate on
That's brilliant, and a great plug there for Jimmy as well. I only came across the pace framework with Jimmy in his book like only a couple of weeks ago. Even just in conversation with Jimmy, I was like, oh wow. And I've talked about it with other guests since. I was like, you know what? I came across this paced framework, and they love it. They're like, oh my god, it actually has everything. It's kind of like the five key areas that if a company doesn't have them, then they're in a burnout culture. If they have all the five areas of paste, then the company is growing and the workforce is growing. Everyone is in a growth culture. But if it's lacking in any of the areas, I feel it doesn't have to be all
Yep.
the areas. If
No.
any of them are lacking, then the company is dwindling or it's on its way to crash and burn. Because if it's missing any of the paste, then it's more than likely going to be losing uh another element. Let's say if there's no down if they have purpose, abundance, connection, uh exploration, but not downtime, if they don't have any downtime, eventually people are going to be like, okay, I'm so wrecked. Then they might not be curious anymore because they're so exhausted. They're not going to be curious enough to look at different areas. And then that will lead to maybe they'll be disconnected then. And next thing you find that they're dwindling and losing that framework. What's your approach then to, let's say, you can use the pace framework if you want, but what would be your framework if you were to let's say try to implement that environment in the workplace of growth?
So I use a model that I've developed from my time in F1 that I help people with performance pieces. But and that was the original idea: is how do you get better data-driven decisions? With where this model came out of. But I've actually found that it works in various different scenarios, including things like career development and just in terms of how you grow, any projects that you've got. And I'll give you a little background as to where the thinking came from. In that I came across a term a while back called infobesity, which I think is just a wonderful term of people are consuming so much data and information from so many places and so many sort of empty calories of information that the thinking and the premise is that the more data I consume, the better my decisions will be, and the better performance I will have off the back of it. And I think it doesn't take much to think about that for a moment and go, actually, that's not necessarily going to be the case. I can, and the alignment that I have to the F1 world is if you want your car to be as fast as possible and to perform on track as fast as possible, you can put more and more sensors on that car. There's always more data you can get off that car, but it comes at the cost of weight because each sensor has a weight to it. And that weight leads to a detrimental impact on the performance that you're actually trying to drive from getting that data. So you've got to have this sort of return on investment approach for if I'm going to get more data, is it worth the performance that I'm trying to drive off the back of it? And so what we do is flip things on its head. And I developed this model called the rapid model, where you look at if you're looking to do any sort of data driven decision, and it can be in, as I say, career development, it can be even where do I invest in my organization in terms of generating more data. I worked with a large fizzy drinks company, for instance, that spent 10 plus million euro on upgrading all of their lines to produce more data so the data was more accurate. And then they didn't know what to do with it. And so it's like, well, that's because you took a data first approach and assume that more data is better. Whereas the rapid framework says, start with the results that you're trying to drive. Are you really clear as to what you're trying to do and what restraints you've got? I'll talk about the what and the how of results. So you might want championship points, for instance, if you're in the world of F1, but you also have things like it's got to be within the regulations. It's restrained by, it's got to be within the rules. It's got to be aligned to the strategic objectives of the organization. McLaren very big on sustainability, for instance. You might have an organization that has a strong D&I agenda that they're trying to drive. Well, is what you're doing getting you the result in a way that also adds and doesn't diminish from that other strategic objective? So you can achieve the same thing in different ways. So you can start to be clear as to what do you mean by results, and the sort of, is it results at all costs? Is it results in a are we a really ethical company? Are we a really? There's no point in Patagonia going, right, we're going to have better business results, and we're going to burn down to rainforest to achieve it. It's misaligned to their whole strategy. And so once you're clear on results, you move to the next phase, which is actions. What are the actions that we have at our disposal to push and pull those levers that you've got, the things that you can do that have an impact on those results? Do I truly understand all those things? And there's some ways to start to build this out and sort of flesh it out for yourself. And once I know what those actions are, who are the people deciding what those actions are going to be? So in the world of F1, it's like, who decides when to pit in the car? Who decides what to do when there's a problem in certain areas? And then who enacts those as well? So who are the people? What's that working environment? All the team elements that go along with that. And once you know those people, the I is for insights. What insights do those people need to make the best decisions on the actions that drive results? And then what you end up there is, these are the insights that these people need. They need the data and information, which is just the facts and figures, and information being the sort of manipulation of those figures to give it a bit more meaning. If you then structure that information, bring in other elements of information, present it in different ways, it becomes insightful. And insights in my world is about data and information that supports you in making a better decision. So it's not just a report. It's the report that highlights where the problems are, where the priorities are, and what you could do about it next. You've still got people making decisions, but it helps you move along there. And what that does is it goes, right, if these are the insights that people need, what's the minimal data set that's going to generate those insights? And what data do I actually need to generate that insight? And what data do I not need? And then you can strip out all of this. I'm going to spend 10 million euro, and go, actually, we need to spend 2 million on this stuff and do it really well. Or we need to, actually, we've got it all already. We just need to bring it together in a different format. And following that rapid framework is something that helps me. I've always found frameworks help me in any situation, be it burnout, be it getting through the challenges that are there. If you've got some confidence in a framework that says, right, I don't know what the hell to do here, where do I start? That's where a framework brings those things into play. If you're looking at burnout and you're looking at the PACE model, you go, right, I've got something where I can actually look at this and start to assess where I am against these individual things. And that's what the rapid framework does for me.
I love it. And I think one thing that you had there, especially at the end with the D, was that it all came down to the one thing. What's the one thing? I'm sure you're probably familiar with Gary Keller and the one thing as well.
Yes.
That the one thing that makes everything else easier or completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
And just as you said there, instead of spending 10 million on getting all the data, what's that one piece of data that I need that might only cost 2 million? Maybe we already have it.
Yeah.
But what's that one thing that will make everything else absolutely unnecessary, or else everything will be easier if we just have that one thing. So I really love that concept. And yes, using different frameworks to give yourself an outline, a blueprint, to give yourself that direction to move in. And that's what I always love. Some people always throw out quick fixes or cure-alls as to how to start your recovery. But I found that the most effective thing is to have a more systematic approach. That you can't just say one thing will fix everything. If you want to start your journey, just start with one thing. Well, again, it's almost contradicting myself in a way by saying you can't start with one thing, but that one thing is part of a process.
Yes.
So I think when I always come,
Yeah.
Yes. When I come back to leeway, I always think about what's the simplest step? What's the most silly, ridiculously simple step that you almost feel silly doing it? What is the most simple thing that I can do today so that everything else will be easier? Or at least I'll be improving myself or growing in some way so that I
Mhm.
can turn up as a better person tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I always start with what's the most ridiculously silly thing that I know what I can definitely do, and I'll feel better because of it. And the first one is always a glass of water. If it's
Right.
like if I can start off my day with a glass of water, I've won.
Right.
That's my win for the day, and I'm off to a winning start.
Yeah.
And the second one is after I brush my teeth, look in the mirror, and I smile. Just smile to myself.
Right.
Make it a silly smile, make it a friendly smile, whatever smile makes you happy. It lifts your mood. The next step is the next person that you see, whether that be your partner, friend, your family, or even your dog, just smile to them. If
Right.
if they smile back, it's a win. If your dog smiles back, it's a double win.
Yeah.
Hey, but yeah, it's what's the most simple thing. But then that's not the whole process. That's just step one, and making step one as easy as possible so that everything else seems to just fall in place. It's like, okay, step one, I've got to win. What's next?
Yeah.
Rather than overwhelming yourself with 100 steps to do or one massive step, one big step to start everything, and then everything else being easier afterwards. If that one step is your obstacle, that first step is your obstacle, you'll probably never get around to doing it.
Mm. It reminds me, I don't know if you know this one or not, but I can't trying desperately to think of the guy's name, but it's the naval admiral, I think is American guy. It's back in the it'd be a while back now, early 2000s or something. But if you YouTube, go on YouTube and search for this, like I'll find the link. I'm sure we can put it in here. But he talks about making the bed. First thing to do every morning, make your bed. And firstly, it's an easy thing. It's something you can achieve, and you feel as if you've done something. And if you've done one thing, it leads to the next thing, and it leads to the next thing. And I love how he rounds it all off. Excuse me, rounds it all off with. And at the end of the day, if you've had a really crappy day and everything's gone wrong, you come home and your bed's nicely made. So there's always a positive to be had from it. So it's like do that one thing first and foremost in your day, and then it sets you up for the next things that come your way.
Yeah, and I've found it funny because I keep on coming across other people's examples saying the exact opposite, being like, "It's like, what? Why bother making your bed? Is there like you've got so many other things that you could do with your day? Is there like you're going to mess your bed when you get home anyway? So what's the point of making it first thing in the morning?" And I was there like, okay, and is there like it's like it both are valid points. I think a lot of people, especially, it's like you make your bed and you feel good about it. It's just
Yeah,
that one simple thing.
yeah,
You feel good about it. You remembering to brush your teeth in the morning, or I think it's a BJ Foggs has the flossing one tooth
right,
is the tiny habit is to floss one tooth, and that's a win. And any other teeth that you floss is a bonus.
right,
So it's about having just that one thing and you're proud of. It's just that one little win,
yeah,
and I think that's what you need to start growing. A, let's say a winning mindset.
mm,
I think that's the best way for you to get your day off to a good start.
mm,
Instead of dwelling on, oh, I've got so much things to do today. I'm so far behind, and the day hasn't even started. If you can give yourself that one tiny task, be that making the bed, brushing your teeth, smiling in the mirror, drinking a glass of water, that's how you get your day off to a winning start.
oh, wonderful advice. Yeah,
So I think that you covered a lot, especially with the Formula One and coming to businesses for coaching from the Formula One. Do you also work with individuals? Is it on and is it on the same, let's say the same, uh, obviously not the same level as a business, but would they have similar? Would there be similarities in what you teach to businesses as you do to individuals, or would it be different?
so firstly, yes, I do work with individuals, and one of the things that I always encourage people to do is to reach out and just if any of this rings true in any as an individual or for your organization, reach out to me. And there's a button on the website, one of the first things around booking a free 30-minute chat with me. Have a chat and see where it goes. I'm all about performance. That's always been my focus. So if that performance is about your personal performance, then let's see what we can do and how I can add value. If it's about your organization's performance, that's the same piece. Individuals, I've tended to work a lot around some coaching on career development in particular, but it's also worked with people using that rapid performance model as well in things like, I've got a big project coming up, or I've got something that's happening in my world and I don't know where to go with it, how to define the performance and move it forward. That's what I've found most useful about it, is having a framework allows people to move forward and take those steps and have visibility that they are working towards something. So yeah, more than happy to chat to people about helping them with their individual performance, as well as organizational piece as well.
Awesome, brilliant. And what's the best way for them to get in contact with you, Paul?
So the website is paulteasdale.co.uk, and that one of the first things, I think there's even a pop-up to help you as well. There's a big button there, but there's also a pop-up to book that free 30 minutes. And I can't stress enough, it is all about just what does, even if it doesn't resonate with you and you think, you want to give me some feedback and something, I'm always willing to have a chat with people about what that means to them. If I can add value in that 30 minutes, I'm not looking to sell anything. So, it is, if that then goes from there into something else for us, and I can add more and more value, then brilliant. But that's all I'm after at the end of the day, is how can I add value and how can I bring that forward. I'm also quite active on LinkedIn as well, so always look out for me there. And yeah, have a listen. I've got a podcast as well, so I've about helping people perform. So have a listen to that, and if that has other people who I'm connected to, who I can then connect you with as well. And that's another way that I like to help people and add value to them, is that if it's not something that's in my wheelhouse, or if I'm not the best person for it, how do you move them on to someone who can really help them?
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, we can stick all of that in the show notes anyway, so everyone can check it out. That's awesome, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eugene. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Appreciate you having me on.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, could you take a moment to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify, because it really helps to improve the rating of the show so that it's more easily found by others who might enjoy the show just as much as you. And maybe take a moment to share with family, friends, or a loved one, because what better way to help break the stigma around mental health than to have that conversation with those closest to us. As always, reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on social media, eugene.leeway, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie, because even though Give Yourself Some Leeway is like an outlet for me, I also want to give the highest value to you, my listeners. So I really depend on your feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to hear more about. So until I hear from you, take care of yourself. Maybe have a glass of water, crack a smile, and think of a way to prioritize your own self-care. So until next time, take care.